This is Tyrese Halliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
Look, setting the pace with Alex and Facci. Alex and Facci, Alex and Alex. If I put our jacks in the paint, how you gonna stop me? How you gonna stop me? We can go head to head. Call out your top three, call out your top three. Look at the switch from Duarte. Now that boy got three. We got Halliburton running point. This is the Benedict for the shot. If anybody gon' come in the post, then we got Jalen Smith for the block. Setting the pace, going to the top. Setting the pace, going to the top. This is your number one podcast. Sweeping every team, we gon' need a mop. Smooth.
All right, everybody, joining us on Setting the Pace, he's no stranger. From Yahoo Sports, it's Jake Fischer. Jake, what's going on, man?
How you doing, guys? Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. No, we're glad to have you. So I guess let's just start things here. Myles Turner getting that contract extension with the Indiana Pacers. You know, there had been some reporting that, this was in the works, but, I think it was even in your report that maybe some executives were a little bit skeptical that this was going to happen. So, were you surprised by this at all? And what does this mean for the Pacers now moving forward?
Yeah, at the beginning of the talk, let's say, that Indiana and Myles were having extension conversations, people definitely were wondering if it was kind of a front, right? When he had his previous representation at BDA Sports, they never really broached any extension conversations, but change of agent with CAA, I mean, that's definitely part of that agency's MO to try to find an extension before a contract expires. And the fact that Indiana had all this cap space to front load the deal, it did seem like if Myles was open to taking some form of contract extension rather than reaching the open market, which is what he was saying all along, right? I'm sure Pacers remember the word entering the season was that no matter what happened, he was interested in testing the market. So clearly his first opportunity next to Tyrese Halliburton after, he was injured throughout that whole stretch with Halliburton coming back for that big Domantas Sabonis trade, obviously this time last year. He's playing the center position unencumbered that he's always wanted to in Indiana. And I think for a while now, everyone's kind of been under the impression that this type of extension would get done. It was more about the length, I think, than anything else. And the fact that it was a 2-year deal, I think, was a little bit surprising.
I think it was. I think this is a home run extension for the Pacers. I think a lot of Pacer fans were surprised that, Turner might have left some money on the table. I know that Pacers were able to get crafty by giving him that $17.1 million increase for this season, which other teams could not pay him right away. But what were you hearing maybe around the league as to what Turner's market could have been if the Pacers were electing to trade him?
In terms of teams or in terms of what his salary price would have been?
In terms of what the Pacers would have been able to get back in a deal involving Myles Turner.
Yeah, I don't think they would have gotten back anything more or not much more than what Aaron Gordon got Orlando 2 deadlines ago. And even, that was the price that Detroit was holding up for Jeremy Grant for the longest time. They wanted 2 first-round picks for him at this time last year. He only went for 1 first-round pick. So other teams who were interested in Myles, like the Clippers got mentioned a lot. Toronto's definitely had interest in him over the years. Charlotte's been mentioned, just to name a few. I mean, I know New York, Minnesota looked at Myles Turner before they went and got Rudy Gobert last summer. I don't know if any of those teams would have been willing to put on the table more than like 1 first-round pick and some type of salary match in return. So I'm not so certain that Myles was this giant trade chip that would have kind of held up the deadline market here, and he would have had all these lists of suitors trying to get him, especially right now. It seems like most teams in the center market, they're looking at backup centers. We're talking about the Clippers and Portland and Brooklyn, and Boston has that conversation as well. And you hear names more like Mo Bamba and Jackson Hayes and Rashawn Holmes, not necessarily that like starting level $30 million player.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, the Pacers, because of this move, and Tyrese Halliburton is supposed to be coming back against the Lakers on Thursday, it's still like, what are they going to do at the deadline? Because they have pieces that could sell off. They have, pieces that maybe they could use to buy. So from what you're hearing, there's been a lot of names thrown around with the Pacers. OG Anunoby is one of them. John Collins, another. What do you thinking the Pacers are going to do here at the deadline? Do you think there'll be more buyers or more sellers?
I think in an ideal Pacers scenario, they'd be both, right? They'd be selling off long-term money of veterans that aren't necessarily in the middle of this role. Like if they could find a great deal for Buddy Hield, I think that would be, a win for Indiana, right? He obviously was just a salary matching piece coming back from the Kings, and I think he's been a favorite. He's been a favorite over Carlisle. His shooting's obviously super valuable, but he's not realistically fitting into the long-term plans of this team, right? But I think power forward has been a position that the Pacers have looked at for a long, long time. And so all those names, John Collins, OG Anunoby, even like a Jared Vanderbilt, I think the Pacers will definitely be looking at any type of bona fide younger four-man that could slot into the starting lineup and potentially start to build like a core four here of Tyrese Halliburton, Benedict Mathurin, whichever this four-man is, and then Myles Turner recently locked up the extension we talked about. So I'm going to keep an eye on Indiana. But I'm not necessarily under the assumption that they're like out there, like we have to go buy someone. Like I don't think this is an exercise where we're gonna wake up on February 15th and the Pacers definitely have a new starting power forward. I think it's something they're looking at, but I don't think it's like an absolute goal that we're just waiting to see which guy they end up going and getting.
No, it's a very valid point. I think the Pacers have set themselves up where they could go many different ways. They could be sellers, they could be buyers, they could remain pat. They have draft picks coming in. They got cap flexibility in the offseason. So we've set ourselves up to be in a good spot. But one of the names that you mentioned, OG Anunoby, and we heard that the Suns are interested, the Knicks are interested, but we also heard that the Pacers and Pelicans are interested. There's been that rumor out there that 3 first-round picks has been offered for OG. I can't confirm or deny, but what do you feel that the asking price is for OG and how available is he?
I don't think he's available right now. I think they're listening. Toronto's listening to virtually everyone on their roster aside from Scotty Barnes, and I don't think they're really listening on Pascal Siakam either. But if you call Toronto right now and say, hey, we're interested in OG Anunoby, the Raptors will say, all right, what are you going to put on the table, man? So any notion that like they've decided to change tune and they're now all of a sudden listening to calls, that's been the case since December. It's just a matter of all these teams that want him, they're waiting and hoping that the Raptors will actually move him. So is he available right now in this moment? I would say he's not. I would say that could change, and teams are hoping that could change. And one way it could change is if teams put those 3 first-round picks on the table. But I mean, in terms of price, yeah, the DeJounte Murray benchmark of 3 unprotected picks, or it was 2 unprotected and a swap. Forgive me for not having the exact valuation off the top of my head, but it, 3 first-round picks was definitely the benchmark there for DeJounte that I think the Raptors will hold in a similar light for OG. But they also want as much as they can get. Like they're not going to stop at 3 just because that's what the shot. Like if they can get 4, if they can get 3, and these types of players, like they're going to hold out for the highest offer. And I think it's been pretty clear that Toronto's done a pretty masterful job of drawing up all this interest in their players and making it seem like they could be dangling the top players that could be moved on the deadline, because now they're getting all this access and all this, all these incoming calls that allow them to really understand the board and sift through all the different scenarios that could unfold. I think it's been strategic from Toronto's end.
That is very smart. We know that Masai Ujiri is a mastermind. He's pulled off some really good trades there for Toronto. And, staying here with the Pacers, obviously, because it's the team we cover. Chris Duarte has been a name that's been mentioned. I think Goga Batadze as well. And we know Daniel Tice does not really seem to be a long-term piece for the Pacers. So out of those 3 names, have you heard anything on their front? And maybe what is their trade value amongst the league so far right now?
Yeah, I mean, Duarte's value is obviously the highest. Tice, I think they've been hoping he comes back, healthy for a while now. I remember when the Pacers were here sometime early in January, maybe mid-January. I remember hearing, oh, he's like close, and now we're in February, and we're still hearing he's close. So, who's to say exactly when he'll really return on the court? If he has a definitive date and it's come out, I apologize for not seeing that, but I still think it's kind of been talked about as an upcoming thing, right?
Yeah, Scott Agnes put out that he could come back this week. So
yeah,
Could be this
we're
Thursday or against the Kings. Expected this week.
So we're definitely closer than we have been before, but he's not someone who I think is gonna come back and play 3 games with a deadline. All of a sudden, there's going to be a ton of people lining up to go acquire Daniel Tice, right? Maybe.
If only.
The backup centers we talked about earlier, he's one of the only guys that I think will be on the market that's played deep into the postseason, and he was the starting center basically on the Celtics team that reached the Eastern Conference Finals down in the bubble. So like he's got legitimate postseason experience. So I could see some contender looking at the backup big market and thinking this is the guy we go and get, but I don't think that's that likely. Goga, I think, is going to end up being more of like a throw-in type scenario, not to be dismissive of his talent and his upside. I do think something like him plus a bunch of second-round picks like the Lakers offered for Rui Hachimura is the type of deal that maybe he could get moved in. With Duarte, he was super, super good a year ago, right? And just the injuries that have piled up that have limited him a bit. The fact that Tyrese and Mathurin are just the real backcourt of the future now in Indiana. That's kind of, I think it's more of like Indiana recognizes that he could be their blue chip prospect to go send for an OG Anunoby, to go send for someone who could really raise this team's ceiling higher. So I don't think he's like someone who, like Bones Highland in Denver, I think is more of like the Nuggets are looking to use him to go get something or someone, or the fact that like him and Mike Malone are exactly clicking personality wise, what have you. With Duarte, I think it's more of like the Pacers are dangling to see what he could get, not like this is the guy we want to send out.
Yeah, there's a few teams with a ton of draft picks. I mean, the Oklahoma City Thunder, you got the Knicks, you got the Pacers, you got the Jazz, and then there's also a ton of teams without picks. And there's also teams that are valuing younger players or teams that are just valuing draft picks. What seems to be that common theme out there of, hey, if teams are looking to sell, they're really looking for either young players or they're looking for picks. Is it one or the other this year?
Everyone right now wants draft capital. Maybe that's just I think it might just be a reflection of the fact that Rudy Gobert went for 5, DeJounte went for 3, and now the market's kind of out of whack. But there aren't really a ton of teams that are just like putting up our asking price and saying like, we want this, and if you don't meet that, like we're done. I think everyone's just looking for value. So I mean the younger teams, the developing teams, the rebuilding teams, I think even those ones, like we're talking about Indiana, they weren't supposed to be in this position to go shopping here for upgrades. The Orlando Magic, I don't think, are just like trying to sell off veterans and get draft picks back. I think they're keeping an eye on how they could add to their group. Houston Rockets too, like they've looked at John Collins, for example. Like there isn't exactly a clear buyer seller look across the aisle, let's just have a marriage here situation. I think draft capital will always help lubricate deals. But it doesn't really seem like anyone out there is just like looking for picks back besides the Jazz. The Jazz are the one team that very clearly wants future draft capital. They have valuations on their guys, where they want those things back. But then again, like I know that they checked in on Dorian Finney-Smith and they've been linked to John Collins. Like even they're kind of looking at players as well. So it's kind of like a fluid situation, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I've heard the Jazz are looking to sell. They're not losing sight of their plan, and that's kind of what I was wondering what the Pacers were going to do. Are they going to lose sight of their plan that this first year of the rebuild and try to make the plan? But who really knows with that? I'm more so curious. Is there a name or two out there that really hasn't been brought up in the last couple of recent cycles that maybe you think could be a surprise person that could be moved to the deadline?
There always can be a surprise. Like people weren't like ready for Domantas Sabonis to get dealt, right? I think it started to hear some inklings about that and about maybe exploring a sign and trade for DeAndre Ayton this time last year, right? But wasn't really like fully expecting him to be on the market this year. I mean, if like Zach LaVine became available, I'd be surprised, but I wouldn't be shocked, right? There are plenty of teams that are interested in him. The Bulls haven't met expectations, but outside of that, I mean, most teams are they're looking to get better. Like the overwhelming majority of the league, 26 teams are looking to get markedly better right now. And you don't do that by moving a big name. So, we could see something crazy where starters get swapped for starters. Like D'Angelo Russell gets sent, in some capacity for, another $30 million player, something like that. But I'm not expecting there to be like a real banner name moved. I think this is going to be, I mean, OG Anunoby, if he got traded, would be by far the biggest name. I think John Collins would be by far the biggest name. We could wake up on February 10th and Jay Crowder is the biggest name to get traded. So that wouldn't exactly be like a marquee big ticket item.
Man, that would be a letdown because, the trade deadline is like a borderline Christmas for some of us fans. So, I read last year, I think there was about 58 players overall that were traded. And this year, it just feels way too quiet. So you'd like to think a storm's coming. But, you talked about John Collins a couple times. He appears to be available. We've heard his name kind of shopped around a lot. The value on John Collins, or the asking price, seems to be lowering and lowering. What is your gut feeling on what could get a deal done for John Collins?
I think the Hawks are primarily focused on trying to find defense in addition to Trae Young. That was a big element to the DeJounte Murray trade, the fact that he could be a defensive backcourt partner, but also, the idea was that DeJounte would be a little bit, on ball and allow Trae to run off ball and get him cleaner, better open looks on catch and shoot opportunities. That hasn't exactly worked out so well, but the goal is to, I've been told the goal from the Hawks is to, use John and his offensive ability, try to find more defensive reinforcements. So, if they can find basically any combination of players that are going to be veteran, playoff tested, true role player contributors, then I think we could see a deal for John Collins. But they're not going to move him just to move him. That's been made very clear. So they really do need to find a deal in order to get something done.
All right, Jake, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm going to give you like 4 names, and I want you to kind of give me what you think their trade value is. So I'll just go one at a time so I don't confuse you. But we'll start here first. Obi Toppin.
I think Obi, some team would give up a first-round pick, something equivalent of that, to give him an opportunity. There's definitely, there's support for even people in New York who want to give him more opportunity to run around and dunk and shoot. So I think someone would take a shot at him. He'd be an interesting 4-man for Indiana to look at too.
Yeah. Jared Vanderbilt.
The Jazz certainly value him as a first-round pick. I don't think so many other teams do. If they did, they probably would have already traded him already, right? There's definitely a thought that his metrics aren't exactly as good as his eye test would suggest. Offensively, he's obviously very limited, but the Jazz value him as a first rounder, that's for sure.
Okay, 2 more. KJ Martin with the Rockets.
KJ, I think the curious thing is that he was a second-round pick, and his contract situation is a little more unresolved in that he will be probably looking for a bit of a hefty salary, sooner than later. But he's got upside. He's got real upside. I think, honestly, of the 3 players you guys have talked about so far, depending on what a team's appetite is to pay him, I think he probably has the most value of those 3.
Okay, interesting. And then the last one I have is a little bit of a wild card here. Jonathan Isaac. Is there any value out there for the Orlando Magic power forward?
I'd find it hard someone would trade something of significant value to he's just such an unproven commodity at this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, it does kind of strike me as a wait and see. I think he's only played about 3 or 4 games this year, and that's, after missing quite a few years since dating back to the bubble. But a player that we all still remember the potential that we saw in the bubble. So I don't think anyone's going to make the move yet, but curious to see what happens in the offseason. I'd say one of my last questions is just going to be, if there's going to be one team that's likely to kind of hit the reset button at the deadline, what's your gut telling you?
I mean, reset in terms of like they sell off and they rebuild?
Yep.
And Toronto is the best bet, I think. I'd be surprised if Chicago does decide to quote unquote blow things up. I've been told it would be more with an eye of more of like our shakeup and still the goal of trying to compete right now. So I think Toronto has shown the biggest appetite for like truly rebuilding.
Awesome stuff, man. Well, I guess my last question to wrap it up here is, who do you got winning the Super Bowl?
Let's go Birds, baby. We're taking it all the way.
Love the picture of you at the game. I was laughing, so I said I gotta throw a little of love there for your Eagles. I really am not a fan of
Thank
either
you,
team.
guys.
So I guess I'll root for the Eagles just for you, man.
Appreciate it.
I'm so over Mahomes. So just get the job done. You know, hey,
Do it.
go Birds at that point.
Go Birds. Thank you, guys. I appreciate
Hey.
the love.
Jake, before we sign off, please tell everybody where they could find you at on social media and some of the awesome content you're putting out, because this is the time to be following Jake right now, everyone.
Thank you, man. I'm at Twitter at Jake L. Fischer, Fischer. My call-in show does twice a week on the call-in app. Follow me there to find all that information, and that's about it. Yeah.
Awesome. Jake, definitely appreciate you coming on. Feels like, we've been doing this each year, and I hope to have you back on again.
Sounds good. Take care, guys.
All right, thanks, Jake. See you.
Setting the pace, going to the top. Setting the pace, going to the top. This is your number one podcast. Sweeping every team. We gon' need a mop. Smooth.
Baby.